Hi, and welcome back to the Tamarack Sew Along. In today's lesson, we'll be starting to apply our bias binding and assembling our jackets to the point where you need to decide if you're attaching a collar, a hood, or just following the original pattern. So make sure your pockets are attached or inserted, and let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is apply bias binding to the lower hem edge of the back of our jacket. We're going to find two notches. You see there's a notch towards the bottom of the jacket on the side seams, and we're going to be binding between the two notches. So what I like to do is measure out a length of binding. I'm going to take slightly more than I need. And you're going to open up your binding and start pinning it to your jacket. So again, we're going to start right at that notch, and we're going to round the corner, but we don't want to stretch our binding, because by stretching our binding, we'll end up gathering our corner and it will kind of bunch around once the binding is fully applied. So just lay it down gently, curving but not stretching the binding. Here I have an old thread tail, so if you find any of those, cut them off. And just keep working around the bottom of the jacket. If you are very good at applying bias binding, you don't actually need to pin this. You can easily do this at your machine. And here we are at the other side. Here's our notch. So I'm just going to pin up to that point right here, and then I'm going to clip the binding. So now we'll head over to our machine. We're going to sew the binding in place using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that will fall right in this first fold of our bias binding. All right, so align your fabric. I am back tacking here. And sew around, making sure that your binding stays aligned with the edge of your jacket. you get to a seam in your binding, make sure that it goes through flat underneath your foot. And here we are at the other edge. Back tack and clip your threads. Now we need to press the binding away from the jacket towards the hem. Flip your jacket over, and now we need to press our binding to the wrong side of the jacket. We have a fold in here already, so we can just keep that as we press. And you're going to want to make sure that your edge of your binding meets the stitching line that you just stitched. If it doesn't, you can adjust this fold slightly, but we just need to make sure that we're able to catch that when we sew our next seam. Now you can see I've just put a few pins in to hold the binding in place as I maneuver it at the machine. Now what we need to do is we need to stitch along the edge of the binding through the binding so that we also catch the back. If you don't like the look of stitching on the front of your jacket, you can whip stitch this closed or slip stitch it, whatever you prefer. I'm going to be machine sewing mine. Now I have my edge stitch foot where this guide will allow me to stitch an even distance from this fold here. And make sure you take your pins out as you sew. Make sure you take it slow around the curves with your edge stitch foot because we're aligning a straight piece of metal to a curve. So it can be easy to sort of get off track if you're not super careful. There we are at the end. So you're just gonna back tack and clip your threads. Now here you can see our binding. We have a nice even line on the front, and on the back we have caught our binding so it is secure in place. Now that the lower edge of the back of our jacket is bound, we need to sew our shoulder seams. So you're going to lay your jacket out with the main fabric or the outside facing up, and take your fronts. The outside or main fabric should be facing the back of the jacket. You're going to line those shoulder seams and pin. And the other one. Now we're going to head over to our machine and we're going to just stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance. All right, so our first shoulder, align it with your 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're going to back tack and just sew across. And then the other shoulder. Now what we need to do is press our seam allowances open. I like to press the seam allowances of my Tamarack open because it's already a bulky jacket, and if you have both layers of seam allowance facing the same direction, it's a lot of bulk. So you will also need to figure out how you want to finish your edges. You can serge them, you can do a zigzag stitch. A lot of people bind them. We do find that that does get pretty bulky, especially at the underarm. So it's completely up to you. I would do a test to see what your machine can sew through. I'll just be serging mine. So we're going to repeat that for the other shoulder. Make sure that's nice and flat. So here you can see our shoulders are sewn and the seam allowances have been pressed open. So go ahead and finish these as you plan to finish your entire jacket. And that is it for today. All right, so that is it for today. It was a very quick lesson, but we just needed to prep so that we were ready to either attach our collar, our hood, or finish the neckline as the original pattern intended. So next up, I'll be showing you how to attach the collar. Make sure your jacket is ready to go, and I'll see you back here next time for that. As always, if you have any questions, let us know in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you don't miss any of our video updates.